Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and if necessary destroy media narratives. I'm Ciara Haley and today I'm joined by both my co-founders, George and Peter, and Graham Elwood, who is the host of the Political Vigilante on YouTube. Welcome, Graham. Welcome to The Gaggle.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
Thanks for coming back on. Graham, I wanted to just ask you first, I saw your most recent video that was criticizing MSNBC and their claims that the Biden cabinet is actually progressive in their terms. It's a progressive cabinet, not a cabinet of people who want to warmonger. And I want you just to elaborate on your views there.
Well, yeah, if you saw my retweet, I just retweeted and all I put was ha 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 ha. Like, it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life. Like, this is a cabinet. And I was, when everyone was dancing in the streets, I'm like, okay, good, Trump's gone. I didn't like him. But like, do you realize what you're dancing for now? A cabinet full of neocons and war hawks and the most corporate Democrats ever, oil lobby people. It's literally all of the like Obama and Clinton, war hawks are coming. I mean, they just put in Neera Tanden. I mean, there's WikiLeaks of her saying, yeah, we need to bomb people for their resources and we need them to pay us. And I mean, like this is, I said, if, and they've been trying to get into Iran. Obviously they've been trying to get into Iran for decades, but the people around Trump, Bolton, Pompeo, there was a bunch of false flags, in the Strait of Hormuz, which was basically just like false flag highway. Anytime they, oh, Iran shot down one of America's drones. You mean the one that was in their airspace? Like, I'd love to see America, how it reaction if an Iranian drone was in our airspace, what the reaction would be. And now, their atomic scientist who was assassinated, and who knows who was involved. I have a hard time believing that the CIA and Mossad weren't somewhere involved in that. They are wanting war with Iran. And this cabinet that Biden is putting in there is just sort of typical neoliberal, warmongers, pro oil, pro big business, but hey, they'll wrap it in a rainbow flag, and yay, we can all the liberals.
But, Graham. But the thing that is most unspoken about is that these people are grifters. Okay.
Yes.
I mean, and big time, and they're very proud of it here. I mean, before it was something you probably wouldn't want to reveal, but now they just show all their friends, and because all their friends are going to shower lots of money on them in the name of a progressive foreign policy. I mean, I didn't think we were going to do a comedy hour here. Okay. I mean, what in the world is progressive? A progressive warmonger. I mean, can you dress that up for me? Okay, because it doesn't make any sense at all. But your point is well taken, is that we had an election cycle where foreign policy was barely mentioned. Okay, and I think that was intentional. And I put a plague on both political parties for doing that as well, because there are plenty of never Trumpers out there when it comes to foreign policy. Lindsey Graham comes to mind first of all. I mean, these people haven't changed at all, and then they're probably relieved that Trump has got out the door in that sense, not on other issues there. But I mean, just to characterize that, I mean, what was it? The PBS talking head, one of the presenters of the program, their programs, said that this is the most professional group of people to go into the foreign policy positions of any administration, and they're apolitical. So I got to top you on that one. Okay, apolitical is even more hilarious.
It's right. I mean, no, that's right. You're absolutely right, Peter. I'll just follow up on that. Is that what is now known as progressive is what is called humanitarian intervention, and this seems to be a characteristic of democratic administrations. We had this launched under the Clinton administration, and then came to rich fruition under Obama. And it's the same crowd. Anthony Blinken, I mean, he's the one. He's going to be the leader of the foreign policy. He was there at the crucial moment on Yugoslavia, where they practiced this humanitarian bombing on Yugoslavia. Right. Blinken was a key figure in all of that. Blinken was a key figure in the destruction of Libya, and Blinken Blinken, now the new Secretary of State, is already promising to renew the regime change war in Syria, all, of course, in the name of humanitarianism. And the progressives seem to be unable to counter this. It's like you tell them, oh, it's humanitarianism. It's for the poor people. It's for the poor Libyans. It's for the poor Kurds. It's for the poor Syrians. And just blindly follow what is essentially just a warmongering policy. I mean, just because John Bolton, who isn't there, or Pompeo isn't there, it's the same policy, and yet the progressives are quite happy just blindly following.
Graham, speak to that, because not all progressives feel that way. You're a progressive, and you obviously don't feel that way here. But I mean, George and I spoke a couple of days ago, or even it was yesterday, is that when we look at the situation of Venezuela, and then AOC just goes along with the Trump administration's position. Can you explain that? Because it seems to me, I mean, in a broader sense, and one of the things that I'm very disappointed with so many progressives is they bought into Russiagate.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, like this term, I mean, I agree with so much of what George is saying, because the progressive, like, just people, citizens such as myself, we feel like we have no more representation, because AOC and the squad, boy, have they acquiesced. I mean, AOC, you know, a year ago was calling out Nancy Pelosi on Twitter saying, why are you, we have the Democrats control the Congress, why are you voting for Trump's border wall? She was, and she took a ton of flack for this. And now she calls Nancy Pelosi mama bear. And this is the, you know, the sleep aid of Obama. You know, he put the anti-war movement to sleep. There was a thriving anti-war movement in this country during Bush, because everyone was like, weapons of mass destruction. He's lying about it. Why are we going to Iraq? And then Obama gets in office, and everybody goes to sleep, to where, and you have these so-called progressive people within the Democratic Party, like politicians like AOC, and they're just going to go along with it because, oh, we got rid of Trump. And this is the problem.
Well, that's it.
Yeah, but
see, this is where George and I, hang on here. Yeah, this is where George and I always get into an argument, and I'm really glad that we have Graham here. Okay, because my contention is that how long will progressives put up with this, or are they just permanently caved? Maybe you can settle an argument between me and George. Go ahead.
Well, let me just say, let me just follow up on that point. Well, let's just follow up on that point. Let us look at the hero of the progressive, Bernie Sanders. Bernie. Bernie Sanders supported the bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999. He came out against the Iraq war, but that was because it was George W. Bush's war. It was a Republican war. It's a freebie. Then when it comes to Libya in 2011, that was Obama's war. Sanders goes silent. Says nothing. No position at all. You think, well, surely, hey, you're the hero of the progressive, you'd say something. He doesn't say it. So the point is that you get people like Sanders, the leader of the progressives, who is all shaking his fist when it comes to Republican wars, and then either falls silent or gives the 2 thumbs up when it comes to Democrat wars. That's where the problem is.
Yeah, that is the real, that is the problem, is this notion. I mean, this is the problem with the duopoly in America, is it forces people, no one will hold their team accountable. It's always the other side's fault. And what we're seeing, and you make great points about Bernie, who, you know, yeah, he was against the war in Iraq, but like you say, it was a freebie. It was just like, oh, I'm against George Bush. He was okay with the war in Afghanistan, and, you know, he's voted for a lot of pro-war funding and stuff like that, the F-35. I mean, like, so it's really true anti-war progressives, and the term progressive has been so co-opted now, you know.
I mean, but Graham, I want to ask you, how does one define a progressive? I think there's a problem with definition. Progressive is a term that's brushed along a massive section of anyone who's in the gray. You're progressive. You're not a Democrat, you're not a Republican, you're progressive. And it's such a big gray area. How does one actually define the stratums within progressivism itself?
Yeah, it's a great question, because we saw, and I mean, this, when when Tulsi dropped out and backed Joe Biden and Bernie did that, I think they both sort of sold out. And I said on my show, I said, I don't even know if I call myself a progressive anymore. I'm an anti-war, pro-labor, pro-environment socialist, because progressive is just like the person with the coexist sticker on their Prius flipping you off in traffic. So
yeah, but I mean, but I guess again, George and I have discussed this at great length. I mean, progressive as it's used in a conventional sense when we talk about politics. I mean, are they just going to continue to go along? Because I mean, you and I have talked about this many times. Is that just wait till the election's over, wait for the next election, and we'll let you sit at the adult table. I mean, at this point in time, I mean, in considering the people that Biden is considering for his potential cabinet, I mean, that's just telling progressives, open your mouth so we can spit in it, okay? I mean, at what point do you guys say, no more? No more, we're getting, why don't you reach across the aisle and find, non-Republican conservatives, because many of the issues that you're interested in, I'm equally interested in, okay? Not everything, but I mean, that would have some kind of traction, okay? Instead of just, constantly being the poor cousin. I mean, when are progressives, as it's used in the conventional parlance, get to say, just flip the bird and say, forget it?
Yeah, I know. It's that I don't know. I've been advocating on my show for a while. I mean, since everybody just caved to Joe Biden in the primary in March, I've literally been saying it is impossible to reform this Democratic Party from within. I'm a big advocate for the People's Party. I've had some people who are forming that show. I spoke at their convention in August, and that's the only thing I see, because the reforming the Democratic Party from within, and the progressives who keep thinking is, because I laugh when you say that, because it's so we're already hearing again. Don't be critical of Joe Biden during the general election. Okay, wait till after the election. Well, after the election, we're all being critical of him. His cabinet is horrible. Oh, we'll wait till he gets sworn in, and then it'll be wait till the midterms, and then wait till 2024, and then wait, just like.
And the main thing that I always hear thrown about is that Joe Biden must be held accountable by progressives. That progressives are there as a bulwark against him in terms of his accountability. Which I don't really understand the logic there.
Well, that's the way it works. The whole purpose of having people like AOC or Bernie Sanders with the Democrats is to show, hey, look, we've got the left. The left is here. We're all one team. It's a way of shepherding in the left to support essentially kind of center-right Democrat leaders. I mean, that's what they did to Clinton. That's what they do to Obama, and that's what they'll do with Biden. I mean, it's a fig leaf. That's the role of AOC. And that's why when we have this idea that, AOC is going to rebel and she's going to lead some kind of a movement, it's just it's a theater. It's a Punch and Judy show, because we know that AOC and Bernie Sanders will go along with whatever the Biden administration will want and whatever the party leaders will want. Do you really think that Bernie Sanders will vote against the confirmation of Neera Tanden? Because Sanders is the ranking member of the Budget Committee. He will, we know this, we know the answer to this question. He will shepherd in Neera Tanden's nomination, because he'll be told, look, if you don't do it, Neera Tanden's nomination will fall and you will be blamed for it. And the Biden administration will be enfeebled, and then the terrible thing will happen. Donald Trump will be back. And that's the way it works. It's always, well, if you don't do it, then the terrible Republicans.
George, to be fair, if the Republicans prevail in the Senate, then Bernie will be spared that indignity, because there'll be Republicans that will have these big posters of tweets, and they're going to let the Republicans derail that nomination here. But in principle, I agree with you. I mean, the interesting thing, Graham, for me, is that having people like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer in the same party as people like AOC, it gives them cover, because they're actually liberal Republicans, but they say, but we're related, okay? So that somehow gives them their bona fides of being on the left, because they're not on the left at all, okay? Donald Trump is a national security threat. Donald Trump is a warmonger. Donald Trump is all these things, but you keep giving him all the money he wants for defense. I mean, well, come on. I mean, who's the joke on? Is it on us, okay? I mean, that's what I really find really perplexing, is because all the Democratic Party has now is the culture wars, okay? And that's what really drives me nuts, because there are plenty of conservatives and there are plenty of progressives that it's the economy, stupid, it's working people, stupid, and we could be in lockstep. But no, we're gonna constantly talk about diversity, which drives me up the wall. What about merit? A merit is something that we should all rally around, okay? But no, and looking at all of the things coming out of this potential administration just sends a chill down my spine, is because they're not even thinking about a stimulus for working people at all. They're worried about, you know, the quota system they're going to have all across the country. I mean, and really what it is they're all helping their friends. If you look at income disparity among the different ethnic groups here, among black people, 10% have most of the wealth. Among white people, 10% have most of the wealth. If you look at the average income of 70% of people, it doesn't matter what your race is, but they keep telling us it is important. It's not. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, it's a really great point. I mean, like, you guys make great points. These, you know, it's all designed to keep the machine going, the war machine, the 1% machine, the Wall Street machine, and all of this AOC hand wringing and this and that or whatever. It's all look, Pelosi was the one that blocked us getting a stimulus plan before the election. She was she was offered a stimulus. So I'm not taking that stimulus. I mean, so it's like, what's going to happen here? Like, to the other questions we've had already on the show. When are progressives going to stop taking this? When are they going to get out of this utterly corrupt party? I mean, I think there's an economic collapse that's coming. I don't think people understand that there's a meteor heading for America in the form of a complete economic collapse. We've printed more money since March than we've ever printed. And you have a housing bubble, you have a commercial real estate bubble, you have a student loan bubble, you have a car loan bubble. There was over 2 million car loans that were 90 days late in February before the pandemic. You have food lines. Like, gee, I only thought this happened in these horrible socialist countries. That we just had Thanksgiving. The food banks are every city. The food banks are miles long, and we're sitting there having these two utterly corrupt parties get into some dumb slap fight, and then, you know, oh wow, Bernie Sanders has now become this. He's just the master progressive tweeter. That's all he can do is tweet. And you know, I hope, and I will say this: the younger people in America are really waking up to the fact that these two parties are nonsense, and that's where I hold out hope, is that they're going to see this utterly corrupt system that has just plundered the whole country. And
yeah, but Graham, if I can echo what you're saying, but and maybe take it a little bit further, if you look at young people, what is it, like over 90%, 99% are not being able to accumulate any kind of wealth whatsoever to establish life. I mean, what I worry about is that, you know, not only is there rejection of the two-party system, but there's a rejection of the system. I mean, what's it doing for me, okay? Because what I see this next administration is just continued moving wealth upward. There's nothing going to stop it. There's no brake on it whatsoever. And if young people can't accumulate some kind of wealth, they won't get married, they won't be able to buy homes, they won't be able to buy cars, they won't be able to buy much of anything. And you already mentioned food banks here, and I don't think I'm being extreme here. I think it's moving in that direction, and I don't think anyone in the powers that be recognize the train wreck that is coming in slow motion before our eyes.
Well, I think, Peter,
what do you think of?
Sorry, Peter, I just want to say that I agree, like, as a young person, that especially during this time of crisis, with the economy shutting down and everyone heading towards a recession, it's my generation that will be paying for this.
Yeah, but you told me that you and your friends thinking of home ownership is almost like pie in the sky.
Oh, it's like it's an impossibility.
An impossibility. When I was in my early 20s, that was like, oh, you work hard and you get a home. That was just a thing. And now, I mean, I have, anyone I talk to in their early 20s, or my nieces and nephews who are teenagers in early 20s, buying a home is like not even it's forget it. And they're even talking about, I don't know if I want to have kids, because if the environment's collapsing, why would I want to put kids into this world? Not to mention, we've got the other thing I forgot to mention, in addition to the food banks and all of these market bubbles, is there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 28 to 30 million pending evictions that are coming. The eviction moratorium ends January 1st. So what are you gonna, what I don't think the Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and even the Mitch McConnells and Lindsey Graham, I don't think they realize how close to the French Revolution their necks really are.
Yeah.
Because people are going to be, when people can't eat, it's going to change.
Yeah, Graham, what do you think of the idea of a union between the left populists and the right populists? Because if it's just one or the other, then it cannot succeed. I mean, we saw what happened with Trump. Trump was a kind of right-wing populist. He succeeded in winning an election, but was immediately co-opted by the GOP party establishment and ran essentially as a fairly mainstream kind of GOP.
A Jeb Bush.
Pursuing his usual agenda, which is tax cuts for the rich, school choice, everything for Israel. I mean, it was very much a usual GOP agenda. And again, you have the sort of the kind of the left populist with Bernie Sanders was easily co-opted and told to shut up and follow the Democrat line. What if you combine the two? What if you have some figure? I don't think it's Trump. Trump is kind of old now and he's running out of ideas. But you could have somebody like, I don't know, Josh Hawley, kind of a senator from Missouri, who's fairly young and could easily adopt some parts of the kind of a left-wing economic platform, ending income inequality, maybe universal healthcare infrastructure and so on. And then he also has some parts of the right-wing platform, which would be immigration control, trade, nationalism, and so on. So do you think that something like that is feasible?
Yeah. And I think that is the solution. I think when people realize, rather than fighting with each other in the streets, when they realize that this is class warfare, you know what I mean? When all of the groups realize this, that they, and I point this finger at some of the conservatives, the red state voters, I was like, an immigrant is not stealing your job. A billionaire stole your job. And when people come to that realization, I think that coalition that you're talking about, George, is really where it is. And there's some, it was interesting, there was being floated around Jesse Ventura running and there was a draft Jesse movement. He didn't really know about it. When he found out about it, he's someone that I think is intriguing in that regard, because he is very lefty, very anti-war. He's an ex-Navy SEAL, and he also ties in the libertarians. I mean, that's the thing. You've got the right populace, the libertarian populace, and you've got the 90 to 100 million people that don't vote because they don't feel like they have any representation. And I think somebody like that, whether it's actually Jesse Ventura or somebody like that, could really bring these groups together and realize working people. I mean, it's interesting. Bernie Sanders, we all know all of his failings, but his populist platform, he did a town hall, a Fox News town hall, and he was out polling Trump in a head-to-head race, and these populist policies that the two parties say people don't want, and they're MSNBC and Fox push. But we know this, that the Fox exit poll of the election, 72% said they want government-run healthcare. Yeah. Florida voted for $15 an hour minimum wage, and they voted for Trump. Like, there's all these things people want.
Right.
Well, and George and I have reflected upon this many times, and even on Crosstalk, is that, they make this false binary choice, is that everyone in the GOP is shivers at the thought of socialized medicine, mostly because of the word socialism. I mean, they say a single payer. But if you look at Trump voters, the vast majority of them say, yeah, that's what we want. We want that. But see, the narrative, they're never the mainstream media will not create that narrative, okay? And certainly Fox doesn't do it. I mean, George and I watch a lot of Fox, and during the day we give our favorite cringe moments, you know. It's like, what are they talking about? They're totally out of touch with their viewership, okay? But they have such strong guardrails. I mean, I could tear apart CNN and MSNBC, but I just don't have those are hours of my life I'll never get back, okay? But I mean, they have their own same narratives explaining why we can't have things. That's what they all do. This is what the entire elite legacy media does. They constantly tell us why we can't have things, why we can't have peace, why can't we have good health care, why can't we have infrastructure. It's amazing. They're in lockstep across the spectrum.
Yeah,
and that's why you get this ridiculous thing of the CNN and MSNBC thinking that we have achieved some great feat in having a woman who's going to unleash bombs against some small country in the Middle East or in Africa. That is a great progressive victory. It's a woman who's doing it, or it's a woman who is instigating torture at the CIA.
Okay, and Biden's shop is all females, all women. Yes. Great, so all of them can lie to us in unison. Okay, I mean, I watch these things and I just, you know, they just don't have any ideas because they're so addicted to the status quo because it works for them. Why change something that when it works really well for you? And I get to use my favorite phrase again, drinking wine in the shower, okay? Because that's all they want. Go to brunch and drink wine in the shower. Because if you do that, you don't see the food banks.
Yeah. But Peter, I think one of the reasons for pushing diversity in their eyes is that is a progressive cabinet to Biden, for example. Having women on his cabinet is
it's not progressive when it comes to policy. I don't care what you're facing.
I'm saying that's the term defined on their terms. My cabinet is progressive because I have people of color, I have females. It doesn't actually matter about their policy or what they believe in. What matters is that there's diversity in colors and gender. And that is progressive, is defined by the Biden cabinet, and I think him himself.
Yeah, and it's a great tactic to keep you know, liberals or progressives or whatever someone to keep them asleep, because it gives the illusion of progress.
Exactly.
And the progress is what we've just discussed. Oh, great! Now, hey, you know what? Did you know all the defense the major Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop? They're all the CEOs are all women. They're all women. Yay, like women get to murder poor people, and they're all white women. Yay, rich white women get to profit from the murder. And Gina Haspel is in favor of torture. So it gives the illusion of progress and things are changing for the better. But the only thing, it's business as usual. The intelligence community isn't changed. The bombing isn't changed. The for-profit prisons, the for-profit healthcare. I mean, I really hope people I try to draw the connection. Like when next time somebody watches corporate media, I go, when they do a segment on, boy, how are we going to afford Medicare for all? And then they cut to an ad from Pfizer or, you know, Anthem Blue Cross, that tells you why they're so against it. Or they're like, why is Boeing buying ad time on MSNBC? Is everybody like, oh, honey, the new Tomahawk missiles are in? Like they're buying influence to keep saying, anytime we talk about war, it's never no war. Why are we doing war? Is never in the conversation. It's always, well, it was either this kind of war or that kind of war. Like Obama just gave an interview to Stephen Colbert. He's like, well, I did all the drone strikes because I didn't want boots on the ground. And oh, isn't Obama so noble? Nowhere in the conversation is why the hell did you kill all of these people?
That was such a bootlicking.
And that's why, you know,
bootlicking interview. Go ahead, John.
When you get to talk about diversity, they never mean the diversity. Well, let's bring in somebody who spent all his life in organized labor. Well, let's put him at the Pentagon. What does he think? That, you know, because he might ask awfully awkward questions like, why the hell do we need to spend $1 trillion a year on all of this when we have difficulties in naming who's the enemy? Who exactly are we supposed to be fighting? You know, again, or we bring some person, you know, from with a very humble background, put him into the CIA. It says, why are we torturing all these people? Again, who's the enemy? Whom are we protecting? That's not what you mean by diversity. You know, let's have everybody's already within that same intelligence, security, military apparat who already share that mindset, who of course take it for granted that we need $1 trillion for the military because the world is full of enemies and we have to fight everyone at all times.
Yeah,
That's why, Peter, sorry, I would just like to ask all three of you then, the whole momentum behind Biden's campaign is about rebooting the nation. To each of you individually, is it going to be some kind of reboot, or is it just going to be continuation in terms of foreign policy? Are we going to see more wars, or after being, what, nearly 20 years now in Afghanistan, is that enough? Can Biden afford to go overseas? Can he afford to deploy troops? Will there be a backlash against that that will stop him from doing that? Will the anti-war vote wake up? Will this just continue what we've seen for the past 20, 30, 40 years? Peter.
You go first, Graham.
Graham.
The Biden is not going to pull back. If Trump doesn't invade Iran before January 20th, Biden absolutely will get in there, and he will probably put boots on the ground in Iran and probably put boots on the ground in Venezuela. You cannot stop the military-industrial complex. It is out of control. The only way is just a complete revolts in the streets. And I don't know if all of the food lines and the evictions are going to make people wake up and say no. They're going to sit there and watch all these wars and go, wait a minute, we don't have a stimulus, we don't have any of these things, we don't have health care. It's going to take, I don't see it. This is how empires collapse. I mean, this is the end of an empire. I mean, we're living in it in real time. So I hope I'm wrong. I don't want to be right, but I don't see nothing. The cabinet is, we got it. It's the war machine is got their cabinet. I mean, they got their guy in there, and it's not going to stop, and he's going to keep the bombs rolling. And we're going to have some false flag with Iran. We've been trying to get them, and assassinating their scientists last week is the thing that I'm sure they're going, well, hopefully Iran said they're going to retaliate, that they're hoping for retaliation. And it's the American empire is collapsing. And unless the people take to the streets in a general strike or something, nothing's going to change.
George, you want to go next?
Yeah, I agree with Graham, because I think Biden and the people around Biden are committed to the idea of full spectrum dominance, total dominance by the United States with all corners of the world. And that's why they keep talking about all these military alliances and expanding these military alliances. It's a way of maintaining American dominance on every continent. I mean, these people have been committed to this idea ever since the end of the Cold War. What they didn't like about Trump is that he started talking about America going it alone, and they sort of realized that you can't have full spectrum dominance unless you co-opt vast areas of the world into an American kind of network of alliances. So when they talk about allies, they actually mean basically American vassals. But you have to at least keep these vassals happy up to a point. But that's what they committed to, and therefore, yes, we're going to have more wars, because the more you expand these alliances, particularly NATO, the more you're going to come into confrontation with Russia, and I think probably sooner or later with China, because as NATO continues to make its push towards Central Asia, it will come into confrontation with China. So yeah, absolutely no change. I mean, because that's the mindset of the people around Biden.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still pondering to what degree they will push this ideological precepts that they have, this neoliberal order. And George and I have talked about this for hours and hours and hours. What I think is there a likelihood there'll be more wars? I don't know yet, but for sure, there's going to be threat inflation. And this is exactly what keeps the war machine going. Not necessarily war itself, but the threat, these imagined threats. I mean, Iran is a perfect example. Russia is a good example. And get used to more China bashing after watching Russia being bashed for 4 years. They're going to get back and get into first place with Russia. So I worry more about threat inflation, invented, of course, which will keep feeding the contractors. And this is, and then it also kind of dovetail on what George had to say, is that NATO still desperately is searching for a mission, and that mission is Ukraine, Georgia, and I wouldn't dismiss the idea of even Kazakhstan. And once pressure is being put onto Kazakhstan, China will react because that's their neighborhood here. So what I think that they're constantly going to be stoking a confrontation. It looks like it's pretty much in the cards already that they're going to restart the war in Syria. Which of course it has nothing to do about democracy or the Syrian people. It has a lot more to do with Israel and the perception that's where they'll draw the line against Russia. So I worry about that. And as I told an interview, a Sputnik this morning at 7 o'clock, is that Russia it still remains a very convenient enemy for the convenient other, this Orientalism to maintain the national security state, and to can constantly explain to people or talk down to people why we can't have good things in life, because we're under siege, we're under threat, and that will continue on. And that will all across legacy media, all across the cable. The message may be modulated, but it's more or less the same.
Peter, I would tend to side more with you in the hope that potentially no active conflicts are begun under Joe, because I feel like his whole campaign has been run under him being status quo Joe. Right?
Yeah, see, there's a wrinkle in that. There's a wrinkle in that because well, you're going to agree with me, George. So let me say it, okay? That's assuming that Joe is running his foreign policy. I mean, he's a hopeless fool when it comes to foreign policy. He's all over the place, okay? And it's take a page from the last 4 years. It's the interagency consensus that determines this here. And, they can pull the rug out from Donald Trump because he didn't know how government worked, and he didn't know how to collect alliances with his party. I mean, he did everything wrong. Even he still got 73 million votes. But they can do the same thing to Joe if he wants to do something.
No one is saying that Biden wants a war and that Biden intends to get into a war. That isn't the issue. The issue is that if you pursue those policies, and if you, for instance, in Syria, if you relaunch the regime change war against Assad, there's a good chance that you could get yourself into a confrontation with Russia. Same way, whether you go into the Caucasus, you go into Libya. Yeah, no one wants a war. That's a given. The question is, if you pursue reckless policies, you could well end up with a war. And I think that's where I think the danger lies with Biden.
Yeah. I think you actually. Sorry, go ahead, Graham.
I was just gonna say it, and there's so many situations where that could happen, George. I mean, they brokered a ceasefire about what was happening in Armenia with Azerbaijan. I mean, look, America gives money to Israel, which was selling weapons to Azerbaijan. We give money to Turkey, which was giving money to Azerbaijan. Of course, we won't acknowledge the Armenian genocide, and neither will Israel. And Russia does business with all those countries. And that was a place where we could have if we just let that keep happening. Thankfully, they came up with some type of ceasefire. I know a lot of Armenians aren't happy with it, but that was another place we could get into another one of these, if not, a proxy war or just a full-on war.
Yeah, what was it? George, you'll probably remember who was the joker at the New York Times. It said the United States should declare a no-fly zone over in the Nagorno-Karabakh. Which, why? I mean, that's always the recipe for regime change. Okay, but I mean, this is the mindset that's coming into power. Is that there's a conflict on the other side of the world and they unilaterally call for a no-fly zone. I mean, this is they always talk about, the adults in the room. The adults left the room a long, long time ago. Okay, there are no adults here. These are all amateurs. They're all grifters, and they want a payday. That's the whole thing. It's a payday scheme for all of themselves and their friends. I'm sorry, it's that simplistic.
And Graham, just finally, I would just like to ask, then with the Iranian potential war at the cusp and this whole thing blowing off with your predictions of war, if not under Trump, now under Biden, what is the chance that we can have an anti-interventionist uprising, or people taking, how much pressure would it take for the American population now to revolt against war and have these kind of protests, the likes that we saw under Bush? Is it a possibility, or do you think the general vibe is more tapered than that or tampered down?
I think if there wasn't this economic crash looming, I think people would all go back to brunch and they would just be like, yay, we're back. We did it. We beat Trump. Orange man bad. But I think this economic crisis is the one wild card that actually could unify people, as we talked about earlier, right populists and left populists, and working class people of all ethnicities who are going to bear the brunt of this economic crash. And watch all of these. Everyone's watching on the news. All the stock market's doing great, and all these companies are making records of billions of dollars, and they're not going to have money. So I think that might, and maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but I want to believe that eventually the I don't know, the hangover of the propaganda that Americans have been fed is going to wear off. And they're going to go, oh man. And they're going to be like, I can't afford to build my bills. I'm on the street. There's no stimulus. And now we're going into some war. What? That's what I hope it does. If the protests in the streets over food and evictions happen before we invade Iran, that's my fear, is then when everybody starts to unify, when everybody unifies, that's when, they come in. Then, Iran's going to attack us, and there's going to be some false flag bomb in an American city that we know is Iran, and then it's going to try to unify people in that way. You saw it the 2 weeks of the George Floyd protests. People of all ethnicities were in the streets. They were tearing down Christopher Columbus statues. They surrounded the White House and were setting trees on fire, and the mainstream media was not covering that. And that's when the mainstream media went, oh, wait a minute. We need to start covering this like it's a race war. Even though I was on the process, it was people of all ethnicities. I had friends of mine who were black. Like, I've never seen this many white people at a Black Lives Matter protest. So it's a chess match with the ruling class. And hopefully the masses, because their whole thing is divide, keep everybody distracted, divided, and afraid. That's their whole tactic. Because when the 99% unify, the 1%, it's over. It's over, and they know this. So it'll all depend on when the economic collapse happens and when the war with Iran happens and how it's used.
But Graham, if I could just push back just a little bit, I agree with a lot of what you have to say. But as long as the left keeps pushing this wokeism here, that has a powerful impact on people, and it's so corrosive to the body politic, because that does enrage people, and people are so energized by it, which I find mysterious, because it doesn't help anyone. Okay, at the end of the day, to answer Kira's a question, when it comes to Iran, dear, in American politics, in our political mythology, there's the wanting to do violence against Iran and the Iranian people. There almost no one's going to push back. Okay, no one. I mean, George and I can testify. Graham also, we're close in age here. Is that that was like breast milk for us growing up. Iran is evil. Iran is bad to us. Okay, and it doesn't matter what administration is in power. So I really do worry about that. And George said nobody wants war. Well, Israel wants the United States to have a war with Iran. Okay, you two guys fight for and we'll stand on the sidelines. That's what they want to do. The Saudis want the same thing. The Emirates want the same thing. But it's never going to be a choice given to the American people, because the whole construct, the idea of Iran, it's so toxic in the American mindset.
Well, I think, and just to go back to Kira's question, there will be protests if people are really suffering economically, and Graham is absolutely right. If there is real economic suffering, because an economic crash, yes, there will be protests, and there will be the pent-up frustration of after a year of lockdowns and people losing their businesses, losing their livelihoods. All of that could well explode. And I think that would be much more important than any foreign policy adventure. I mean, that would be a kind of the icing on the cake, that they're just enraged. What you mean, you can't feed the people here, and you're worrying about what Assad is doing in Damascus. So, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, if there's an economic crash, I think there would be a serious rage in the streets, and then everything is just going to explode, not because of the lockdowns, and then this whole contested election, and then I think there could well be the an almighty serious crisis, which at the same time could lead to interesting political developments.
Yeah, well, I think that is all we have time for, and I think 2020 has been a decisive year and will continue to be a very decisive year until the end. Graham, thank you so much for joining us, and it's been a pleasure having you on.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for
having me. Thanks, Graham.
Thanks, George. Thanks to Peter. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Gaggle if you enjoy.
And a sneak preview, wait for The Gaggle to start doing live shows. I'm not going to give away any more than that, but we're going to be doing it soon.
Yes, and hold your hats on, because we will soon be going live. So stay tuned for more, and we'll see you next time.